with us, as I say, leader of the National Party, a leader of the opposition, the alternative candidate for Prime Minister of New Zealand. Of course, you'll know this, but Chris is a hugely successful businessman with 18 years history at Unilever International, culminating with him as boss, I think I'm right to say, Chris, in Canada. And then, of course, the CEO of our national airline, Air New Zealand. And he's more than that. He's a husband, a dad, an Aucklander, which is important to me, and now senior politician who I had the pleasure of working with when I was a Member of Parliament. I really enjoyed his company. Today we are in Budget Week in Auckland, and our country has a plethora of big issues before it. A cost of living crisis for households and businesses, underachievement in education and health, infrastructure deficits kind of everywhere you look, and safety and crime problems. I could go on, but it'd be remiss if at this business lunch I didn't also at least mention an economy that could and should be stronger, paying higher prices, wages and lifting productivity. So there's no shortage of things to talk about, and we really look forward, Chris, to your take. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Luxon to the stage.
Well, kia ora, good afternoon, everybody. Can I just say thank you so much for being here. It's a great opportunity to come and have a chat with you. Before I begin, can I just acknowledge my good friend Simon Bridges and say, mate, it's great to be with you. Can I just say thank you for all your leadership and all that you and your team are doing advocating for business. You look like you're enjoying the job and you're doing a brilliant job doing it. So thanks for everything you're doing for us and for the country as well. I just want to acknowledge my good friend, our great deputy leader and our very able finance spokesperson, Nicola Willis. Great to have you with us as well. Can I also acknowledge our Auckland-based MPs and also Auckland-based candidates that are here today. Thank you for coming along. And to all of you, can I just say thank you as Auckland's business leaders for coming as well. And it just speaks to how interested and invested everyone is in making sure we build a really great economy. I have to say, this is the most difficult moment for New Zealand's economy since the global financial crisis, and arguably since well before that. Think about it. Real wages have experienced their most significant period of decline since records began. Inflation has now outstripped wage growth for the last 11 quarters in a row. And over the last 3 years, the buying power of your wages has dropped significantly, the equivalent of an average family being around $7,000 a year now worse off. And over the last 6 years, food prices are up 25% and rents are up $175. And with interest rates rising rapidly, with repayments on a $500,000 mortgage fixed just 2 years ago, they're now up $700 a fortnight. And I'm up and down this country each and every week, and behind that data is the reality of the tough choices that Kiwis are being forced to take. And it's in the family that I met who had to stop sending the kids to swimming lessons just so that they could pay the grocery bill. It's the solo dad who had to take on a second job, and so he isn't seeing his kids anywhere near as often as he'd like. It's in the first home buyers who now have a house that's actually worth less than their mortgage, and yet they see interest rates more than doubling. And I just think life shouldn't be that tough here in New Zealand. So I want to be really clear about how we actually got here, because there is a view that it's all about international factors. It's about COVID or the war in Ukraine. And yes, they have had an impact. But over the last 12 months, COVID and the big international factors have fallen away. Oil prices, for example, are well below where they were just a year ago. And according to our Treasury, New Zealand has been less affected by international factors than so many other countries. Australia is boasting a growing economy, lower interest rates than us, and a return to surplus, while the US, Canada, and Singapore all have lower inflation than we do today. And meanwhile, the domestic component of inflation in New Zealand has continued to rise, and it's hitting an all-time high, as we've seen earlier this year. And those domestic factors are the difference between inflation starting with a 6 and inflation starting with a 3. And because they're domestic, I just don't accept the fatalist position that there is nothing that the government could or should be doing about them. think there are three major drivers of this domestic inflation: extraordinary monetary policy, economic blockages, and record government spending. And if we just take monetary policy, it's fair to say that the Reserve Bank, I think, has given this country tremendous whiplash. Because between printing tens of billions of dollars, artificially cheap lending for commercial banks, and taking an axe to the official cash rate, New Zealand had the fifth largest monetary response in the world during COVID. New Zealand was flooded with money, and so asset prices exploded and inflation soared. And over that same period, obstacles for businesses have increased. Restrictive immigration settings meant inflation became embedded and labour shortages plagued whole production chains. And in the case of food prices, which are rising at their fastest rate for over 30 years, we saw the rather absurd situation of $500 million of kiwi fruit being lost last year, even while Kiwis left supermarkets hungry and frustrated, and we had 50,000 more people on job seeker benefit. We had broken financial regulations like the triple CFA, which distorted credit settings, and the part of New Zealand's historically responsible for getting us through tough times, the rural economy, has been totally strangled by red tape. And over that same period, we also saw very loose fiscal policy. Government spending rose in response to COVID, but instead of falling as our lockdowns ended and wage support measures became less intense, spending continued to climb, both in absolute terms and as a share of the economy. And incredibly, government spending this year will be $20 billion higher than in either 2020 or 2021. And there is a very real risk that the government will operate a larger operating deficit this year than at the height of COVID. Now, it's one thing to be spending heavily and operating deficits as you revive an economy with high unemployment and stagnant inflation, as the automatic stabilisers of welfare spending rises and tax receipts fall. But that actually hasn't been the scenario this time. Unemployment is half what it was in the aftermath of the GFC, and inflation is just driving the tax take ever upwards. And so responsible governments cool fiscal pressures at the top of the economic cycle, but we've actually seen the opposite here. Higher inflation, record interest rates, and a looming recession are the result. So today, I want to outline the two pillars of National's economic approach. One, repairing New Zealand's engine for economic growth, and two, restoring fiscal discipline. I take the first because when it comes to growing the economy, there's a lot that New Zealand has in our favour. We are filled to the brim with really hard-working, innovative, creative and determined people. I see Kiwis who get up early to milk cows, I see them head to work, I see them make the school lunches because they want the best for themselves and their families. I also see that we are part of Asia Pacific with a rapidly rising amount of middle class, opportunities for growth and collaboration and partnership, and that is a massive opportunity for all of us to convert. And we also have some great fundamentals. We have arable land, a temperate climate, we have respect for the rule of law, and we have little to no corruption. But despite all those conditions, New Zealand's economy is shrinking, with economists now just debating when, not if, we'll actually enter recession. And the country recently recorded its largest current account deficit on record, at almost 9% of GDP. And that means as a nation we're spending far more than we actually earn. And we're now world beaters at it. We have the largest current account deficit in the OECD. And now credit agencies have started to warn of a ratings downgrade if we don't start to pay our way in the world, meaning even higher interest rates on our debt. And just to give it in perspective, our debt has ballooned from $5 billion up to $80 billion, and it's heading towards $90 billion by the end of next year. Think about that. Interest bill on $90 billion, $5 to $7 billion, which would fund a police department and all our justice department activities as well. So spending our way out of this hole isn't an option. More spending, more borrowing, and more printing of money while ignoring the economic fundamentals is just going to take us back to where we are today. An economy in rapid decline, rapid inflation, and Kiwis falling further and further behind. And that just can't be an acceptable answer to any of us in this room. Instead, we've got to earn our way out of recession. And so we must get New Zealand's economic engine humming again. And it's not about the economy for the economy's sake. And as much as I hate to say it to a chamber audience filled with business people, it's actually not about you, it's actually about people. It's about lifting incomes, it's about creating new jobs, it's about being able to afford all those public services that hardworking Kiwis so desperately deserve. It's about better healthcare, it's about an education system that actually equips our kids for success. And a strong economy and strong businesses are what delivers that for all New Zealanders. So National has a plan to kickstart New Zealand's economic engine. We're going to provide income tax relief because hard work should be something to encourage, not something to tax. We're going to grow the skills to create the workforce that we need, fixing our broken immigration system and getting the education system back to basics. We're going to build infrastructure, delivering the projects that Kiwis need to go to work and businesses need to get their products to market. And we're going to encourage technology and innovation to create higher value Kiwi products and services that we can sell all around the world. And we are going to be ambitious on the world stage because we are an open trading nation in the heart of the fastest growing region of the world, and there are massive opportunities ahead of us to convert. And National is also going to get Wellington out of business. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what I mean by exactly that. A strong economy requires genuine collaboration between business, government and communities. Each has an important but a unique role. And government, I think, should set the settings and get them right, and then they should get out of the way so that business can get on and do what it does best: investing, taking a risk, employing staff, lifting wages. But recently we've seen the government totally confused on its part in that equation, and it's confusion that is leading businesses astray. The government is so keen to intervene and set new rules and that major companies increasingly look to government in Wellington for direction before developing their own investment plans. And I think it's created an unhealthy, dependent relationship that is depressing the spark and the innovation for which Kiwis have historically been famous for. And that has to change. And so I want to bring trust back to the relationship between business and government, a healthy relationship on an equal footing. And so I will lead a government that genuinely listens, not as a risk management exercise or to get CEOs off our back, but to understand what you need from us to go faster and to compete harder on the world stage. And it will be a relationship where you feel comfortable demanding change to regulatory settings that are holding back growth. But with that trust, I expect businesses to come to the table. I want everything you've got. I want your creativity, I want your vision, and I want your entrepreneurial drive to take New Zealand up a gear and to get our economic engine humming again. Talk won't deliver the results, and that's why National has actually been releasing specific policies designed to get New Zealand's economic fundamentals on the right footing. And so renewable energy, as an example, will be a huge part of our future as we move towards our commitment to reach net zero by 2050. But under National, delivering on our climate commitments will not mean stifling future prosperity. And that's why I announced Electrify NZ, National's plan to make investing in new renewable energy much faster and much cheaper. We'll slash consenting times and extend their duration, reducing the costs and the uncertainty of new investment for business. And in return, business will play their part and invest $30 billion over 25 years in new renewable projects. That's what I'm talking about with respect to the partnership. And we're also going to work on easing long-term skills challenges. And I constantly hear from so many of you in this room that employees just don't have the skills that they need on the job these days. And if they're not literate or numerate, skilling them up actually feels really impossible. And that's why earlier this year I announced Teaching the Basics Brilliantly. We're going to require schools to teach an hour of reading, an hour of writing, and an hour of maths in primary and intermediate so that kids arrive at high school ready for extension, ready to go. Where our rural economy historically has driven the economy out of tough times, farmers and growers, I can tell you, have been under huge pressure. Open hostility from ministers has resulted in a range of unworkable regulations, layering on costs, making new investment impossible. And I trust farmers. I trust them to do their jobs, and I trust them to deliver environmental excellence for us. And that's why recently I announced National's plan for getting back to farming. 19 actions that actually tear down the barriers, holding farmers and growers back from their potential and supercharging the rural economy. And I know, as a small trading nation, our economy only thrives when we're building new connections and partnerships with the rest of the world. And that's why I announced our commitment to achieving a free trade agreement with India. Not because it will be easy, but because the lifeblood of our economy is trade, and breaking open into those big, large new markets should be a major priority for our government. Just think about it. Australia now has a free trade agreement with India. The UK is about to close one, and both Canada and the EU are in negotiations that are closing rapidly too. And I just simply will not have New Zealand left behind when we see a big market like that we can convert in and do so well in. That's only a short list, but in the coming weeks and months, I'll have a lot more to say about how we'll bring trust back to the relationship between business and government. But my message is clear. I will do my job and break down the barriers and unleash opportunities for Kiwis who want to go out and beat the world, but I expect you to do your job and harness all of that potential that New Zealand has to offer too. Now, I also want to talk about the second pillar of strong economic management under a national government I lead, which will be fiscal discipline. And for the last 6 years, I think taxpayers have been completely abused by this government. It is spending $1 billion each and every week more than when it came into office. And the only thing to show for it is a massive increase in both our debt levels and the tax take. Net government debt has increased, as I said, from $5 billion to $80 billion in just a few short years. The IRD is now collecting $100 million more in tax every single day compared to just 5 years ago. That's $17,500 more tax on average for every Kiwi household this year. Think about that, sobering numbers. And there's just no acknowledgement that every single dollar the government spends has to be earned by someone. Perhaps someone slogging their guts out in harsh weather, doing their job and paying their tax. And in fact, the only reports we've seen lately from this government on tax have been thinly veiled efforts to gin up support for even more taxes. That's what you do when you're addicted to spending. And I'm sick of taxpayers being treated like a bottomless ATM, to be raided at any time for any reason. So National will respect taxpayers, and we're going to bring fiscal discipline back to Wellington. And there is a perception that fiscal discipline just means spending less money. And governments do have a responsibility to control their spending. But they also need to be laser focused on whether that spending is actually delivering value for money. And putting aside the sheer increase in spending, that's where I believe the government has actually truly failed. Because despite spending $1 billion more every week, there is so very, very little to show for it. Our education standards have slipped, with young Kiwis falling well outside the top 10 countries in the world for English, maths and science. Our healthcare system is in a rolling crisis with the record workforce shortages and major blowouts in emergency department wait times, specialist wait times and immunisation rates. Crime has completely soared, with violent offending now up 33%. Retail crime, like the thefts and robberies plaguing communities all across this country, is now up over 40% in just the last 2 years. And yet there is almost no focus in Wellington on whether the money the government spends on behalf of taxpayers is actually delivering results and generating outcomes. Performance is an afterthought, so millions of dollars continue to be wasted on projects that don't work and don't achieve nothing. And I'm up front, I'm not a career politician. I'm still new to the ways of working in Wellington. But in my former corporate life, that approach to managing money would be utterly unthinkable, and same to many of you in this room. There's no way a responsible CEO would spend millions of shareholders' money on a new program and only to never check whether it actually worked or not. But in Wellington, that's actually business as usual. And I know government isn't a business, but I can tell you Wellington could do with some great deal of commercial discipline being brought to bear. And that's why today I'm announcing National's plan for restoring fiscal discipline in Wellington. National will make 3 major sets of changes to restore discipline to government spending and to stop waste. And the first is National is going to introduce new requirements for Treasury to report on the performance of major spending initiatives alongside the annual budget documents. I'm not going to put up with pouring more money into broken programs that don't work, even while we need more funding for frontline services in health and education. But to get that right, we need the right information. And agencies should monitor programs. They should collect data. They should measure performance. And it is something that the Auditor General has been increasingly frustrated by. He's raised consistently and been calling for some time now. And that's why National will amend the Public Finance Act, requiring Treasury to work out whether existing programs are in fact achieving results. And as part of that, Treasury will be required every year to outline the effectiveness of spending in key areas like health, like education, and like social development. And under a national government I lead, every dollar of spending in those portfolios will be directed to its best possible purpose. Now, secondly, National will make much more information available to taxpayers on how their money is being spent, because too much financial reporting is impenetrable. Unless you've worked in the machinery of Wellington or you've trained as an accountant or in economics, it's just impossible to work out how much money the government spends and where it's all going. And that's why a government I lead will introduce new requirements for financial reporting to taxpayers. Each year, the IRD will produce a taxpayer receipt received by every single taxpayer when their tax returns are finalised. And it will break down how much money they've paid and received in the last year, including any working for family tax credits or other benefit payments. And it will also break down where their taxes have been spent, including on education and health and on welfare payments. And National will direct Treasury to produce an annual report card for taxpayers. And that report card will break down headline stats like tax revenue, spending and debt, all on a per household basis, published alongside the budget each year. It is your money and you deserve to know exactly what it is being spent on. And finally, National will reintroduce and expand performance pay for senior public servants. Executive pay should be linked to achievement, not activity. And when a National was last in government, public sector chief CEO pay was actually determined in part by their performance. But in 2018, Chris Hipkins scrapped that. He eliminated motivation, I think, for delivering extraordinary achievement and outcomes. And it's no surprise since then that decision, there's been a hollowing out of public sector performance. And many of you in this room understand this, but a culture of high performance and accountability needs to be created in Wellington. And that starts with rewarding people for generating and delivering really hard outcomes and results that actually improve the lives of everyday New Zealanders. And that's why National won't just bring back performance pay for CEOs, we'll expand it to the next tier down with deputy secretaries as well, also having their base pay determined at least in part by their performance and their delivery of hard outcomes for New Zealanders. Now finally, there's a budget in a few days' time on Thursday, and I'm going to be looking for three things. First is evidence that there is a return to disciplined spending. And despite the small savings announced by Grant Robertson last week, I have to be honest and say I'm not expecting much success there. This is a government addicted to spending. Second, I want to finally see a plan that is going to get our economy moving again, although I don't expect to see much progress there, if I'm honest, either. And third, I think it's well past time for Kiwis to actually see some tax relief from this government. Record inflation means that Kiwis are paying more tax than ever before, but any growth in their incomes has been quickly eaten up by the rising cost of living. And so I hope, and I think there could be a small chance, that actually Labour will deliver something on tax. But it's likely to be too little and too late and offered only in an effort by a government to secure a third term. So regardless, I'm confident that with a fresh approach, I have to tell you, I think New Zealand has an incredibly bright and optimistic future. I think it's impossible not to be optimistic when you're lucky enough, as I am, to see incredible innovation across the country every week. I can tell you there is an entrepreneurial spirit that ripples right across New Zealand, driving new ideas, new businesses and new partnerships. Our government I lead is going to encourage those go-getters to go beat the world, because when Kiwis succeed, we know that New Zealand succeeds. And so in 5 months' time, New Zealanders will decide whether their country goes backwards for another 3 years or whether it embraces the opportunities that are out there if the government, business and community sector lift their sights and work together. I know which side I'm on. Thank you again for listening to me today. Take care.
When I can. Hey, thanks so much, Chris. It's great to, as I say, have you here. And you talked just then, right at the end of your speech, about the entrepreneurial spirit of business, and I hope in this room we've got a bit of that. You also talked earlier about, wanting a healthy relationship between government and business. Talk to me a bit about business, how you see the current environment for business, SMEs, but look through to bigger businesses as well. And what you think needs to change.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we used to be a country of go-getters. I think we've become a country of bureaucrats. And I think you see that with the huge cost and compliance that's loaded up onto businesses. I reckon a lot of business owners are spending 30% of their week just trying to navigate the costs, the compliance, the regulations, government strategies, government policies. Actually, and we want you working on your business, expanding your business. And so I think we've got to turn that attitude around big time. Business is the lifeblood of New Zealand. You should not feel apologetic for being business people in this room. It's great what you do, because you are one of those three big actors in our society that actually takes the country forward. So I think we've got to get our mentality right, that we are going to celebrate success, not tax it. We're going to be striving for ambition and aspiration and high standards, not just low standards. And we want to be able to back business people to go out in the world and make those investments. I think at the moment, too much of the business community is sitting there with so much uncertainty, not wanting to invest. And so you end up kicking for touch rather than kicking to win, and that's the mentality that we've got to change. So part of it is a mindset to say, New Zealand business people are the best in the world. I can tell you, I've lived and worked all around the world for 16 years. You run into Kiwis doing amazing things all around this great world of ours. But we want to back them big time, and we've got to turn the mentality around to say, let's not play safe and be negative. Let's actually get positive, ambitious, aspirational, and go for it.
Good stuff. I think most will agree with that for sure. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got a question, put it into Slido. We've got them coming through, and I will, I promise, get to those. If we just think about the economy, I mean, again, what's wrong with where we're at? What do we need to do? And I think, for a lot of people, and you touched on this in your speech, really it's a question of, we're struggling to stand still. How do we get this holy grail we've been searching for? Look, for many years, let's be honest, across different governments around a higher productivity economy.
Yeah, look, I think that is exactly the biggest economic challenge New Zealand has had. We have had a productivity disease for 30 years under successive governments, to be honest, and that's their failure that we've not been able to deliver to the New Zealand people. And what I mean by that, for the non-economists in the room, is the value of the products and services we sell to the world, divided by the people working on them. You haven't been able to grow incomes for people fundamentally. So I think when you go around the world and you look at other small advanced economies, that we do many, many things better than most countries in the world, but there are some that have got wealthier than us, and they ask the question, why? I think it boils down to 5 things, Simon, that we've got to work on productivity. First, we have to build a world-class education system. We cannot access higher paying jobs and higher paying sectors of our economy, technology, think about all the other things we want to do, value-added products and services, if we don't have an educated people. The second thing is we do need to invest in infrastructure to make sure that we've got a country that you can connect with the world from anywhere. Thirdly, we need to invest, and we had a good session with you and your teams this morning on just technology and innovation. And I think there's a massive investment for us to make bigger investments, but better join up of that spend of activity so that we actually convert the ideas we have in the technology and science into higher value products and services. We have to make it a pro-business environment. I was stunned when I used to be CEO in North America. I remember in Chicago, I'd have 14-year-old kids come in to say, Mr. Luxon, how do I become a CEO? It was aspirational to be a business person in the US, right? And I want it to be the same here in New Zealand, because I see all the entrepreneurship, all the creativity that I see everywhere around the world. We just need to go now, convert it, scale it up, and make money off the back of it. And the last thing, to be honest, Simon, is the last piece, is really the international connections to the world. We do not get rich selling stuff to 5 million people inside New Zealand. We get rich by going out into Southeast Asia, getting out into India, getting out into the UK, building our market literacy of how to operate in those environments. We can do it. We're Kiwis. We can win in those places and do really well in the world, and we've got to open that up. And so I just think the last few years has been a very wet, whiny, insular, inward-looking, negative game that we've been playing. And we have to get the mindset turned around and get out in the world and start hustling. And when you see a New Zealand government that hasn't really shown up in India, and you see the Australians having nailed it, and the Brits and the UKs and the Canadians, that's a good illustrative example of what I'm talking about.
I like that, wet and whiny. It sounds like Nicola Wellington on a good day. But anyway, when I think about budgets, and I've got the scars of a few of them on my backs, I think about the fiscals, the tax and spend. You talk quite a lot about the spending issues, and that the need to restore fiscal discipline. I'm interested, actually, go where you will, but I'm very interested in what you're saying about reintroducing that performance pay piece to civil servants. Someone's asked up there, on the Slido, so if I can incorporate some of those, will that include Auckland Council and their senior officials?
Well, I'm not responsible for Auckland Council, but I'm sure you've got a lot of influence in that space, so you should go for it. Look, I want to be really clear. There's a lot of... people confuse activity with achievement, and you in the business world know they're two very different concepts. You can get busy, you can go off and do a bunch of stuff, but actually what really matters is outcomes and achievement. And so for me, what that's about is just saying, look, I need those CEOs and those senior leadership teams of those big core public services ruthlessly focused and clear about what they're there to do. They are there to deliver great outcomes for the New Zealand people. That's why we'll bring back something you had in your government, which was better public service targets, clarity around the goals. So here's an example. In healthcare today, every single health metric that Simon's government had has been taken away and it's all gone backwards. So we used to have 5% maybe of Kiwis waiting more than 6 hours to get to an emergency department. Now it's 30% of Kiwis have to wait more than 6 hours to see an ED. We had 1,500 Kiwis waiting more than 4 months to see their first specialist appointment. Now it's over 40,000. So if you don't have targets, targets A in the healthcare sense saves lives, but it actually focuses an organisation to all those public servants showing up in Wellington today. What am I here to do? What's my purpose? My purpose is to get immunisation rates improved. My purpose is to shorten those wait times. That's what I'm here to do, deliver outcomes for customers and for patients and have that customer mentality mindset. So I think we're going to be really clear. We're going to put at risk some of those CEOs and those senior leadership's team pay so that they are ruthlessly clear about what we're expecting them to deliver for New Zealand and for New Zealanders. Otherwise, we carry on doing the mishmash of just talking to each other, having an endless set of consultation and lots of activity, but we're not delivering outcomes for the New Zealand people, which is what they need for us to improve their daily lives.
I appreciate, Chris, you're probably not going to give us a tax policy announcement today, but if you would give us a bit of a picture on how a Chris Luxon-led budget would be different in that regard. What do you think, where tax relief should be aimed when you talked about that? And I suppose deal with the criticism, and I see a question on this from Slido, and I know it would be Grant Robertson's rejoinder were he here, which is, look, tax cuts, they're inflationary, and we don't want to see that in the current environment.
Yeah, look, I just don't buy that. Because as you know, CEOs get different results with the same amount of money. It's what you do with the money. That was the point I was trying to make in some of my remarks. So what we would be doing, and Nicola Willis will be brilliant at this, is taking each department line by line through its expenditure, because we think there are tremendous amounts of waste and savings in the system. I thought it was quite laughable from Grant Robertson, frankly, last week to say he's saving $1 billion a year, when they're spending $1 billion extra each and every single week than they were when they came to power. That is nothing. I think it's 0.7% of a budget. It's very, very tiny, 0.07% of a budget. Tiny. There is a lot of, we've got to go through and get the spending straight, and I think we can fund what we've called inflation-adjusting tax thresholds, an idea that I know you championed in the past. And why are we doing that? Because we've inflation-adjusted benefit payments, we've inflation-adjusted superannuitant payments, all good stuff. But actually, we're not inflation-adjusting tax thresholds for working New Zealanders who deserve a break. And the stories are amazing. Like I sat with a teacher and a nurse the other day, late 20s, got a spreadsheet, trying to save up to get a deposit for a house. The rent had just gone up $50 that week. They were saying, Chris, for the first time, we don't think we can get ahead in this country. We looked at jobs last night in Queensland. And I thought, man, we're not going to have that happen here in this country. This is a country of huge opportunity. I want young people to stay here, to raise a family, to start a business, to make a contribution to their community. So they can't get ahead. So if we give them a tax break through lifting the tax thresholds, which we can fund from wasteful spending, that's all good.
I don't mean to say anything to cast aspersions on this crowd, but I am dubious about some of these questions. One's come in from Mr. Anonymous, what's your favourite NZ movie? So, we can put that in there.
The World's Fastest Indian.
Right, very good. Another question here about infrastructure. Raised a good point. Look, if there's one thing we do need to see investment in, it is infrastructure, isn't it? That said, I'd add to that, we've got a real issue in as much as I'm not sure we have the capacity and the capability to do too much at the current time. What are your thoughts around that critical part of, budgets and, the fiscal position of government?
Yeah, look, I think the tragically sad thing is that we've gone from $5 billion of debt to $80 billion of debt, and we don't have anything to show for it. You know, you would have think if you're going to borrow that amount of money, you would have had some productivity enhancing investment in infrastructure. You know, you've got a government that hasn't been able to start and complete a single transport project in 6 years. So, you know, this is not a government that gets infrastructure done. And yet we know when we make those investments, think the Waikato Expressway, what it does economically, socially and environmentally when we make good investments in high quality infrastructure. I was really struck. I met a vet the other day down in Waikato. She said, Chris, the Waikato Expressway has transformed my life. I can get 1 or 2 extra jobs in each and every day on the farms that I visit, and I can also get home to my 2 young children much quicker. And I thought, isn't it interesting? Great infrastructure, economic, social benefits. You did the same thing with the Waterview Tunnel, for example. So I think, you know, we are just thinking through, and Chris Bishop's leading the thinking with that, with Simon Watts and also Simeon Brown, on how we can actually fund productivity-enhancing infrastructure and do that in a consistent way. Part of what we've talked about on Three Waters is saying we need to be able to give councils access to long-term debt funding so that you match the debt funding and financing up to the life of the asset. Instead, what we tend to do is use short-term cash reserves and then say we've got a problem and we can't sort of get the funding matched up with the life of the asset. So I think we just need to mature our thinking around some of those mechanisms by which we can access that. So we'll have more to say about that in the coming weeks.
There's a question, and I've switched off my Slido, but certainly was here, around sustainability. Look, I think, you know, one of the first times I had much to do with you was in an Air New Zealand BMW electric vehicle. I mean, is it a valid criticism? I mean, are you, where's National at on sustainability and climate change? Is certainly an important topic for many, most, possibly all businesses.
Yeah, look, I want to be crystal clear on this. We are deeply, deeply committed to climate change goals and the 2050 net zero goals. It was your government that actually signed New Zealand up in the Paris agreements in 2015, and we fully support that. We're on board with the NDC goals in 2030. We've supported the government's emissions reductions budgets. But the means by which we solve those problems will be different from this government. We are very committed to the goals. Don't misunderstand me on any of that. But the means by which we deliver those goals will be different. And I think in my 2 years in government, what I've observed is an awful lot of solutions that go floating around looking for problems. And I think when you come from our world, and the business world, we define problems really clearly, and then we put practical solutions that actually support them. And that's why I've been really clear to say, look, the first logical step on a climate change agenda, if we're serious about moving from just talking about these things to actually getting them done, is you actually got to electrify New Zealand. And you've got to use all the solar, all the wind, all the geothermal, all the hydro assets that we're so blessed with. We're the third most renewable in the world. And now you've got to double it, because even if we wanted to make the transition from fossil fuel to electric in all our industry, if we want to do it in all our transport, we don't have enough electricity. So the first thing you've got to do is actually free that up. And again, that's what I was illustrating in the speech was, we already have a sector that says it wants to spend $30 billion doing exactly that in the next 25 years. But when you go out and see a wind farm, it takes 2 years to build it. It powers up 75 to 100,000 homes, and it took 8 years to consent it. Well, surely my responsibility in government as in the enabler is to say that's going to take 1 year, and it's going to be a long consent period as well. Because if it's get it consented 1 year, 2 years to build, we get the benefit of it much, much quicker. So it's a practical, pragmatic approach to climate change. But do not misunderstand me. We are going to hit those goals, but the means by which we go about it will be different from the government.
Question's got a lot of likes here on Slido. That's why I ask it. Relative to Australia, Kiwis contribute little into retirement savings. Is it your view that KiwiSaver contributions should increase? Why or why not?
Yep, I think that's a decision. Australia is such a wealthier economy because many years ago it made quite a different set of decisions around its sovereign wealth fund, and it gives it a strong backbone to the economy. Over time, as our economy grows, I think we have to put more into KiwiSaver, and we have to get New Zealanders more invested ultimately in KiwiSaver as well, understanding their literacy on savings and investing. We've got to keep growing that and keep improving that. So yes, but the reality is Australia, a much wealthier economy. New Zealand needs to become one as well, and that's why we've got to fix a lot of the economic challenges that we've got up first and foremost.
As a new, well-behaved Business Association Chief Executive, I'm not sure I meant to ask political questions, but, I'm also Simon Bridges, so let's do that.
Don't you like the way we sort of swap sectors, really? Yeah, I think it's
exactly. Great. You're up against a seasoned operator in Chris Hipkins. I mean, how do you feel about the challenge how are you looking forward to the next, 5 or 6 months?
Well, look, I mean, the first thing I'd say is absolutely love the last 2 years. I mean, it's been a real privilege to be able to do this job. And it is, I do genuinely feel that New Zealand has endless potential. It's why I've come to politics 2 years ago to give it a good go. I think the difference in our skills are very different. He's a 20-year career politician. I come from a different background. But I think actually for the times that we're about to go through, with really challenging economic times, someone who understands the economy, understands business, and actually comes from a real-world leadership experience that can be applied into political leadership, I think it's important. I think actually coming from outside is a real advantage in my case. Yes, I'm not a polished career politician of 20 years, but I actually think that's a good thing for where we are at the moment. We need change, and we need to get the country turned around. I've done a lot of turnaround jobs before. The principles are very similar. We've got to get the country turned around, back on track, and we can realise all the great potential that we've got in this country. We have everything we need to be successful in the next 50 years. We just have to choose it, and we have to go make it happen and go to work and get it done. So that's why I'm pretty excited about it, enjoying it.
Fantastic. Look, I think I can be reasonably confident about a few things. We're not going to see a red-blue government. We're not going to see a green-blue government, and we're not going to see a national Te Pāti Māori government. You've made that clear. Give me a sense of what a national act government looks like. And actually, tell me this. What are the first, let's say, 4 or 5 months look like if you've got the privilege to be Prime Minister?
Well, look, I think it's realising that we're in a turnaround job. We're not in a sustaining success job. Everything's not going swimmingly well. So we've actually got to go to action really, really fast. We've got to secure some quick and early wins for the New Zealand people quickly. So we're actually working up our 100-day plan now about the things that we can quickly release to unblock the economy, to get things moving again. We're very, very focused on all of that. But I think you're going to find a government that's very pragmatic on getting turnaround and getting outcomes. Again, that's the most frustrating thing I've observed in 2 years. How do you spend $5 billion more on education? How do you hire 1,400 more bureaucrats that sit in the ministry, not at the front line of teaching and teacher aides, and actually get worse attendance records and worse academic achievement? That is just not how it works, right? If I gave you guys more money and more people, I'd expect you to get better results, not worse results, right? But it's a unique and special skill set that this government has to be able to do that with that sort of environment. So I just got to be really clear. I'm there to get a turnaround. And I know Nicola's the same, and I know all of our team. We've put the right people in the right places. We're going to go get that job done. And I hope you've got a sense of the team that we've been able to build over the last year and a half, that we've got the right people on the right assignments that are deeply passionate about what they're doing. And I think they're doing a great job. So we've got work ahead of us. But I want you to know we can get this done. We were the best in the world at education, and we can and will be again. We can get our healthcare system fired up. Yes, it's going to be hard, but if we face up and make some tough choices and we're straight with the New Zealand people about what's ahead of us, we can go get it done, and we can realise all that great potential and all the potential we have in the country, which would be great.
That would be a good place to leave it, but there's one wily old coyote from the north we haven't mentioned yet. What's National's position on New Zealand First going to the election?
Well, look, he's not in Parliament, so I've got nothing further to say about that.
You sound dangerously like him. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just been great to have you here, Chris. We really appreciate your time, your thoughts on the budget. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Luxon.
Thank you.